There is no record of Jews in England before the Norman Conquest in 1066, but we know that Jews from Rouen arrived at the command of William the Conqueror to introduce a network of credit and trading links between his new English lands and his French ones. His son, William Rufus, who succeeded him, was wildly unpopular with Norman as well as Anglo-Saxon subjects, but he did value the Jews, and he prevented the kind of Jewish massacres that had taken place across Europe at the time of the First Crusade in 1096. On the death of Rufus in 1100, his brother Henry I took the throne. He continued a favourable Norman policy towards the Jews, giving privileges of liberty which fostered a 35-year period of Jewish prosperity. During King Stephen's reign, an English as opposed to a London Jewry emerged. Stephen had a new policy towards other previously closely defended royal monopolies such as mints. He allowed new mints to open all over south and central England, and the Jewish population was not slow to take advantage of this new situation. And there is evidence of Jews living in many of the important trading centres by the middle of the 1140s. In 1146, the Second Crusade led to further but smaller attacks, but Stephen protected the Jews and saved their lives and their property. After the Norman conquest, Nottingham as a town was split into two distinct but happily cohabiting areas. Any Jewish immigrants, therefore, would naturally be living in the Norman part of the town. The first mention of Jewish people in Nottingham, in fact, them in the area around St Nicholas's Church, was once known as Jews Lane. Not far from there is St Peter's Church and St Peter's Gate, where in 1257 it is noted that the Jews had a synagogue. In 1193 it was noted that 3 Jews had paid taxes to the government, and in 1204 when King John summoned what was called the Parliament of Jews to Northampton, Nottingham is noted as one of the towns that sent a delegation. King John's son Henry III and grandson Edward I taxed, persecuted, and eventually expelled the Jews from England in 1290. Before that, in 1279, Edward was responsible for setting up the notorious Jews' gallows, whereby Jews could not be executed on the same place as Christians. This may have had some religious connotations, but it was also there to show the otherness and outsideness of the Jewish community. And so for the next 366 years, there was virtually no Jewish community in England whatsoever. At the time of the readmission, Nottingham was the principal centre of a newly developing provincial hosiery industry. The main export outlet was Holland, where of course there was a large Sephardic community, many of whom would have become merchants in this trade. And while there is evidence of a number of Spanish and Portuguese surnames appearing, it was over 100 years before anything like a community started to form. The first mention of a synagogue is 1827. However, in true Jewish fashion, within 9 years there had been an argument within the community, and a breakaway shul was formed in 1836 in Clare Street, just off Lower Parliament Street. This didn't last long, however, and shortly the reunited community took premises around the corner in Broad Street. This was situated in rooms above a factory, and when, during a Yom Kippur service in 1858, congregants went to investigate the noise coming from the factory below, they discovered it was because the factory was making pork sausages and pork pies. It was also in 1858 that a tragedy befell the congregation, when the rabbi, Louis Goldberg, fell from a ladder whilst fixing a mezuzah to the door of his new house in Drury Hill. The hammer he was holding pierced his temple, and he was killed. An appeal was launched in the Jewish press for subscription to support the bereaved family, because it said that the Nottingham congregation was few in number and did not have power to do much in accomplishing this object. In the 1840s, the combination of political unrest in Europe and the booming economy of the British Industrial Revolution led to an influx of refugees from Germany and beyond, bringing with them a wealth of talent, business acumen and entrepreneurial spirit. And at this time, in 1845, the Jewish community became a formally constituted congregation. In the 1880s, there was another wave of immigration, mainly from Poland and Russia, of Jews escaping the pogroms. Many of these people found employment in the huge lace industry for which Nottingham was world famous, and they found their work and their living accommodation in the area around the lace market of Nottingham. And so the Jewish population of Nottingham continued to grow. They still did not have a permanent synagogue of their own, however, and were still using these various places around town. Sometimes the home of the minister or of a congregant, and sometimes a rented room above a factory, like the pork factory before. Jacob Weinberg was one of the 1840 immigrants who built up a flourishing business and became a major benefactor to the community. He contributed constantly and liberally in support of the congregation and paid for a mikveh to be installed in 2 of the Nottingham swimming baths. He was instrumental in setting up the building committee under the chairmanship of Albert Kahn, which was to carry through the erection of the Chaucer Street Synagogue in 1890. Born in Germany, Albert Kahn came to Nottingham in 1883, having lived for a while in Cardiff. In 1889, as well as building up a huge furniture business, he became president of the local congregation. And at Jacob Weinberg's insistence, he became chairman of the committee that was formed to build the new synagogue. He was devout and charitable and able to live in some comfort in this house in Waverley Street in the Arboretum area of Nottingham. His son Julian, that we'll meet later, continued his father's tradition of philanthropy. Albert Kahn and Jacob Weinberg had a disagreement over the design of a wrought iron grille that was going to hide the ladies' part of the congregation from the men's. It would appear that this was never resolved, and as a result, Jacob Weinberg never appeared at the inauguration ceremony of the shul, or again at the synagogue. The building itself was built to a Victorian Gothic design, and because of the stained dark wood, had a rather sombre air to it. It was the only purpose-built synagogue that the congregation had. Over the years, the congregation had many ministers and rabbis. At 31 years, the tenure of Sigismund Schloss was one of the very longest. He saw many others come and go. And he stayed until 1919, when he moved to Margate. In 1888, David Snapper arrived in Nottingham, the first of many generations of a family who have continued to give unwavering support to the community. He is seen here wearing his regalia as Grand Master of the Lodge of Israel. And here, over 100 years later, is his grandson, also David Snapper, wearing the same regalia. After the Second World War, the Jewish community had risen to 2,500, and the Chaucer Street show was no longer fit for purpose. In 1954, a Methodist chapel was purchased and converted to a splendid new shul, ironically in Shakespeare Street, where the Jews' gallows of the 13th century had stood. The ark from Chaucer Street was moved to the new shul and fitted perfectly. The time at Shakespeare Street saw a number of different ministers and chazans, including Cyril Braslavsky, who had a splendid voice, whose untimely death was widely mourned in 1980. He was succeeded by Moshe Perez, who was the first Sephardic minister to be appointed. Like many provincial congregations, the Nottingham Orthodox community has shrunk, and this has necessitated a move in 2017 to newer, smaller premises. Many community members who prospered were not slow to share their good fortune amongst both Jewish and non-Jewish sections of society. These are just a very few examples. Julian Kahn was the son of the aforementioned Albert Kahn. He took over and enlarged his father's furniture business and retired quite young, a very, very wealthy man, when he was able to follow his extensive sporting interests. He was one of very few Jews to ever become a master of foxhounds, and he was a very keen amateur cricketer. When he first married, he lived at Papplewick Grange, and later he bought Stanford Hall, near Loughborough, an elegant country house built in 1771, and to which he added a new theatre. When the new council house was being built in Nottingham in the late 1920s, he donated the two stone lions, Menelaus and Agamemnon, which guard the entrance to the council house, and which have become iconic symbols of Nottingham itself. Probably his most high-profile gift was that of Newstead Abbey, which he gave to the Nottingham Council in order to preserve the heritage of Lord Byron for future generations. A more recent benefactor is Sir Harry Gianogli, whose gifts have been many and various, including to both Nottingham universities and to many other cultural and educational facilities across the city. The Nottingham Jewish Community has also provided its share of members of Parliament. In 1884, Saul Isaac became the first Jewish Tory MP. Previous Jewish MPs had been members of the Liberal Party. And to be nice and even-handed, Jack Dunnett was a Labour MP and Martin Brandon Bravo was a Conservative MP. In the early 60s, families started to discuss the possibility of a progressive congregation in Nottingham. David Lippman and his wife Ray were one of those who became the first members of the congregation. So David, how did the idea for a progressive community in Nottingham start? How did it come about?
My wife Ray and I returned to Nottingham in autumn 1964. There was no liberal synagogue, only the Orthodox congregation, and some of the people who were interested in joining the progressive group had been converted to progressive Judaism, and they were not, of course, acceptable to the Orthodox congregation. There had, in fact, been a group of people interested in creating a progressive Jewish group over the last couple of years, but nothing had been achieved. There were no services, no synagogue, no congregation.
So how did you go about setting the whole thing up?
Well, we invited some people to our home in Woollerton Park, and that meeting was on Wednesday, the 9th of March, 1965, to discuss the formation of a progressive Jewish group. And about a dozen or so people came. And in that meeting lay the origin of the congregation. And it was agreed there that 3 public meetings would be held. The first, in fact, was addressed by a Reform rabbi, the second by a Liberal rabbi, and the third elected a committee at which I became the honorary secretary.
So when, after that, did the actual services begin?
Well, the first service was held one Friday evening at the home of Lou and Joan Canis, and that was on the 11th of June. And for some time after that, a room in the meeting house of the Society of Friends was used. They were very, very welcoming. And that group that eventually became affiliated to what was then the Union of Liberal and Progressive Synagogues and is now Liberal Judaism.
So how did this go down with your friends at the Orthodox community? Because that's where you'd been brought up, wasn't it?
Well, yes, our efforts to build a congregation were met with great hostility by members of the Orthodox congregation. And some people, and I'd been brought up in that congregation, and there were people who were my friends in it, but they ostracized us and some wouldn't speak to us. I think they regarded me as a pariah. Having said that, I remain immeasurably proud that this thriving congregation, under its inspirational leader, Rabbi Tanya, grew from that meeting all those years ago in our house. And if I ever need a reminder, it is in the Ner Tamid, because Ray and I bought that everlasting light while the synagogue was being built. And as Theodore Herzl said, the establishment of the State of Israel, if you will it, it is no dream. And Ray and I dreamt a dream, and that dream became a reality, amazingly enough.
And long may it continue. That's wonderful. Thank you very much, David.
Thank you.
As the congregation grew, it needed a home of its own, and in 1970 the council were persuaded to take this piece of land in Lloyd Street, Sherwood. The building proceeded apace, and on October the 1st, 1972, the new shul was inaugurated. It was a most momentous occasion, with the service of dedication being conducted by two rabbis, Sidney Brichto and David Goldberg. And the Lord Mayor of Nottingham was there to add his seal of approval. During the Second War, over 1,500 Torah scrolls were taken by the Nazis from synagogues all over Bohemia and Moravia. They were stored in an old shul in Prague. In 1964, they were purchased and brought over to London's Westminster Synagogue, and thus the Czech Memorial Scrolls Trust was formed. When the congregation was founded in 1965, it applied for and received one of these scrolls on permanent loan, and in 2015 a further scroll was obtained. This has enabled the congregation to form strong links with the towns of Slavkov and Kamenice, from where these scrolls originally came. It's an important link with the past and a permanent reminder of the legacy of the Holocaust. Here we have a very young Julia Neuberger, who came as a young student rabbi to the congregation, and who returned as Dame Julia Neuberger for the 50th anniversary celebrations. During the 1980s and 90s, the congregation was well served and the community much enhanced by Rabbis Alan Mann and Amanda Goldby. And in 2009 arrived Rabbi Tanya Saknovich, originally from Belarus. Over the years, Rabbi Tanya has been enormously active in raising the profile of the congregation within the local community. She is a member of a number of interfaith and community groups, and was a co-founder and a trustee of the Jewish-Muslim charity Salam Shalom Kitchen. Under her tenure, the community has grown and strengthened and now numbers more than 300 people. The Nottingham Jewish Community is small, but it is strong, and is well integrated with the rest of Nottingham society. And many of their members are involved not just with their own community, but with the life of the city as a whole. And long may it continue. If this has whetted your appetite for some more information, then this book, which was written 20 years or so ago, will give you a lot of information on the history of the community. Much research was done by many members, using both public archives and also the works of Abraham Lassman, who was a secretary of the Nottingham Hebrew congregation and wrote his own but unpublished history of the Nottingham Jewry. I am, and we should all be, indebted to them all. Thank you.